Hello and welcome back to Shoot Punch Kick, the podcast where three cybernetic organisms talk 80s and 90s movie violence. If you haven't already, and judging by the numbers you haven't, hit the subscribe button and follow us on Skynet's internet. I'm Dash, and with me as always is Telly and Carlos. What is up, my fellas?
What up, cybernetic organism? I like it.
Right, or regenerated zombies.
Yeah. That's one way of phrasing it. We're watching Universal Soldier today. We're bringing the 1992 action movie Universal Soldier back to life, directed by Roland Emmerich and starring Jean-Claude Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren.
Yeah.
So we're gonna break down the movie with a synopsis by our AI overlords, ChatGPT, even though we're not sponsored. Universal Soldier 1992 follows the story of two American soldiers, Luke Devereaux and Andrew Scott, who were killed in action in Vietnam and later resurrected as part of a secret government project that turns fallen soldiers into elite memory-wiped bioengineered warriors known as Unisouls. However, Devereaux begins to remember fragments of his past, and when he deserts the program, Scott, a deranged soldier with a vendetta against Devereaux from their past life, hunts him down, leading to an intense battle. The film combines sci-fi action with themes of lost humanity and control as Devereaux fights to reclaim his memories and humanity while escaping the ruthless program.
Wow. I want to watch that movie.
Yeah.
Also, it didn't really talk too much about the villain. I don't know. It's a little scary that they, Devereaux just left the program and, Dolph Lundgren's out to get him, but they don't talk anything about, necklaces full of earrings or anything that happened in Vietnam. I think it's kind of odd that they whitewashed the bad guy and made him, he seems like he's the hero at least in the synopsis we just heard. Yeah,
I mean, they made the program sound like the problem, which it was really like an afterthought. Like it didn't have that much screen time, and surprisingly, no mention of like the 20-minute diner sequence in this movie. But we'll get into it. But let's give a little bit of background to Universal Soldier. So this movie was released July 10th, 1992. Great year. With a budget of $23 million, it grossed $95 million and opened and never rose higher than number 2 behind A League of Their Own. Wound up being the first of
baseball.
This wound up being first in a series of Universal Soldiers movies. So I'm going to go on the record. I haven't seen any of them. Just the first one. How about you guys?
I saw the last 2.
Okay, so how many were there total?
There were 2 cable movies, 2 direct-to-video movies, and 1 actual sequel, 1 true sequel. So that's 2, 4, 5, 6 movies.
Was that with the one in theaters? Was that with Jason Scott Lee?
No, the one in theaters was with Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Oh, okay.
And Michael Jai White. Yeah.
Oh, all right. Carlos,
and I saw the main one, of course, and the one with Scott Adkins. I'm not sure where that falls in the chronology.
Day of Reckoning,
which actually I thought was pretty good. Surprisingly,
okay. It was interesting. I just didn't know what the hell was going on because I could not remember the first movie at all, so I just didn't know where the connections were, if there were any.
All right,
yeah,
so
this is
no.
I think you're probably moving into where we're going at, just like our histories with it, right? Like, so I remember specifically going to the theaters to see this movie, Marlboro Theater. I saw it with my mom. She really enjoyed it. This was a movie that was always kind of thrown up there in the Van Damme kind of pantheon. So I'm sure I must have seen this movie, I don't know, a dozen times, but I haven't seen it in decades since we were kids. So again, kind of like, coming home to a movie that I vaguely remember, but pretty much seeing it for the first time.
Yeah. And Telly, you said you haven't seen this since theaters as well?
I saw this in the theater at the Kingsway Fiveplex in Brooklyn, which is no longer there. I saw this only one time in the movie theater, never watched it on home video. So this is the first time I'm watching it in freaking 32 years.
All right. Crazy. So let's keep the mic on Telly. What were your initial reactions of after you've seen it? It's been so 92. So what this is 32 years old.
Yeah.
So what were your initial reaction watching it?
I remember not liking it when I saw it in theaters, and watching it again, I could now remember why I didn't like it, and even liked it even less, especially now thinking about comparing this side by side with like Terminator 1 and 2. And it was the same producer, so I'm sure that was intentional. But a lot of weird decisions were made, and just the look of the film, I just was really the Unisouls could have looked cooler. There just seemed to be a lack of production design, and there are a lot of Roland Emmerich isms in the movie that were just, to me, were just distracting and annoying.
Yeah. How about you, Carlos? What were you thinking now?
I had a little bit of a different take, at least initially. As a kid, I loved it. Right, it was Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren, and they were shooting people, and they were basically cyborgs, but not cyborg. They were cyborg zombies, and he does his split kick in the rain. So I mean, I left that theater. I remember specifically leaving that theater like mind blown. Whoa, mom! My mom liked it really too. So I remember the conversation in the car ride home from the theater, that we really liked it. Going back to it as an adult, I'm kind of with Telly. I think a lot of it doesn't really hold up. Plot is kind of silly. Action isn't really, really great. But I would say turn it on if it's playing in the background somewhere. I wouldn't necessarily turn it off. It's not the kind of movie I would kick out of bed.
Yeah, it's same here. This wasn't a movie that I've seen it more than once. I definitely saw it in theaters and on video, but probably 8 when it came out. And this was a movie that I saw specific. Like, I know why I bought it and why I held it in high esteem in my mind, because I love Terminator, and this movie was close to Terminator in terms of what they were trying to do. And as a 8 to 10-year-old kid, I'm like, works with me, But watching it and just knowing how how close the inspirations were. One, it's just like so blatant and so side by side. It's tough to not compare them, and it just did not hold up anywhere close to what it was in my mind. And it's funny because this is the second Jean-Claude Van Damme movie I picked, and I thought that Time Cop held up in my mind a little bit more, because what it lacked in the execution of some stuff, I still got Jean-Claude doing a split, and it still had some of the time travel things that it could piggyback off of, as to make it like a smarter movie, where this one just made so little sense in so many respects. And I didn't realize how little of the movie wasn't the promise that was made, right? Like, I thought it was going to be, oh man, it's going to be Jean-Claude Van Damme, everyone's kicking ass, and then it was just spent so much of the movie doing some whole other stuff. But let's talk about the story. This was written by 3 people, but just wanted to call out one of them in specific, Dean Devlin, who would go on to write Stargate, which Carlos, you're a Stargate fan? Or
indeed, I am.
Movie or a show?
Both.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so this is his baby, and Independence Day, constant Roland Emmerich collaborator, as well as Godzilla, and that, I think that is to Telly's point, those Roland Emmerich-isms are all over the movie. And it's weird because the movie starts off on such a serious note, or serious tone of killing civilians, Vietnam War, slight bit, not even slight, but some cases of racism and things like that, and then also gets into the the kind of lighthearted summer blockbuster one-liners.
Are we having fun yet?
Yeah, and I thought
No,
can you hear me? With the ears. I thought that was such a weird mashup of themes that didn't do either one of them any service. What did you guys think overall of the tone and the amount of different kind of plot points? Not plot points, but also just ideas that they tried to put into this one movie.
Yeah, tone was really jarring because the violence, didn't remember it being so graphic. There's so many headshots, blood splattering here and there. But you got the goofy comedy of the ensemble cast and the side characters that have their little quirks, and then you have this pretty serious story at the center of it of Jean-Claude Van Damme trying to find out who he is, where he's from, what happened to him. And then you have a cartoon villain, that's holding up a supermarket. I forgot why. I don't even know why, because of the
well, yeah, to
the
freeze
freezer.
his,
Okay. Yeah. So it's just all these different things just don't really gel together, and just you're kind of just wondering what this movie is actually about. And at the end, you just don't really care.
Yeah, agree.
I feel I'm kind of in the same boat. I think one of the things that stood out to me, again, you were talking about Emmerich. was even before looking to see who wrote or directed the movie, I was definitely getting Independence Day vibes from it, and not in a good way, because I don't know, say what you will about Independence Day, it's good for a fun kind of close your brain off ride, but it also had a big budget behind it, really great set designs, a cool idea of alien invasions, which will always speak to me. And even though, again, kind of to your point, the pieces are all there, right? A cool military project, right? That they're taking dead soldiers. These guys are invincible. They feel no pain. And, you take Dolph Lundgren, who I'm a huge fan of. You take Van Damme, who I'm a huge fan of. You put them against each other. And I'm thinking this is just going to be, balls to the wall, perfect for me. And it fails kind of in every single thing that it tries to do. So in terms of the sci-fi stuff, it looks really kitschy. And in terms of, also like believing the program that this whole thing is based out of this ostensibly just a truck with a freezer in the back. It fails at that. It fails at the choreography. There's no real kind of fighting choreography. The action sequences are kind of hackneyed. And then when it tries to be funny, I laughed at all of those lines, but I wasn't laughing at the lines. I was laughing at how bad the lines were. Not only written, but also recorded. But somehow, again, I think that if this didn't have those jokes, then this movie would be taking itself completely seriously. And I feel like that would have been even more of a bad way for this thing to go, like another nail in the coffin. If it took itself seriously, this would have been a complete shit show. And as it stands, it's kind of only a dumpster fire.
Yeah, for me, I thought I think it could have stood to go a little bit that route of the seriousness, because I think like it could have been just really like dry and dark, but I think it just drew so much attention to the fact that it wasn't funny, and I think that you really see the difference of how much a charismatic cast can make. Because if you look, it does feel like Independence Day, but when you have Will Smith, Jeff Goldblum, like a all-star cast of just people that can carry it. And I was watching the bonus features, and I think it might have been Dolph Lundgren who was like, Roland gave them so much like autonomy and the ability to collaborate and stuff like that. And those, nobody there is really known for their personality, that you really want them, to be the people. So it was just like even hearing some of Dolph Lundgren's thinking behind the character that he had. It's like, okay, he wanted to make him seem more menacing and things like that, but like nothing in the script led up to that. His motivation was all over the place. So it really didn't have the, no one to carry that comedy. And whenever they really did the comedy of, at least with Jean-Claude Van Damme, it was like so one note, right? Like it would just be him like doing a look, or like really just that fish out of water joke. And then it was just that for an hour.
It just felt like there wasn't a director's vision behind the entire movie. That it sounded like the final product just looked like a director said, "Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Why don't you try it?" And Dolph Lundgren's doing his thing, Van Damme's doing his thing. The comedic relief stuff, I just was like rolling my eyes.
Can I give a quick shout out to one bit of comic relief that actually did work for me? Was they made a reference to his accent.
Yeah,
like, oh, you're American, or you fought in the war or something. They're like, well, what about the accent? He said, what accent? And then you also meet his parents, and they don't have the accent.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if that was intentionally supposed to be as funny as it was. I'm sure it was meant to be unserious, but the fact that I think it was the one bit of humor that really actually landed for me says a lot. Because I laughed when I heard it, and then I laughed that I laughed about it.
Yeah, no, I feel like that was intentional, because there are enough jokes in there that I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. But
well, that was the beauty with Van Damme movies in that period. You have to explain why he has such a thick French accent without or Belgian accent without
Belgian.
Making him being a guy from another country.
To our Belgian listener, I'm really sorry.
But I think that's the thing. Like I feel like he just couldn't have that same kind of. I don't know why. I think it's mainly because they just kept putting him in roles that was like so all American that you had to explain.
Guile.
Like,
They made him fucking Guile, bro.
Right.
Arnold Schwarzenegger would never. You just show up Austrianed out and not
And
even.
I don't care if you grew up in Louisiana, you're still not going to sound like you're from a foreign country, you know. So
Yeah. But jumping ahead a little bit, I know usually we talk
the
about
father
some of the
had no accent, so I don't know how you explain
You know what I'm
that.
saying? The parents didn't have any accents.
Yeah.
Well, there's a alternate ending on the Blu-ray, and
nice.
The way that it goes down is there's it's everything plays out the same. His fight with Dolph Lundgren, and he's in like the wood chipper, and he gets chopped up, right? So one thing happens before that. You know when Dolph Lundgren shoots he has Ali Walker, Veronica in held captive, and he shoots the propane tank. Right before that shot, they cut it out. He shoots the mother. So the whole rest of the scenes, plays out. They have the fight. Dolph Lundgren kills Dolph Lundgren. And then when he's like, you think this is the end of the movie, and the father comes out and shoots Jean-Claude Van Damme, and you're like, what the hell's going on? Then all of a sudden these guys in suits come out, and it turns out they're from like Unisol. And they basically say that those aren't his parents, that they're actually his real parents are alive and believe that he's dead. Let's keep it that way. But they did this whole sting operation because it was the only way to get access to him. They figured that he would go back.
That sounds better.
So
It's
then,
funny because when they cut to the scene of him in the parents' house, I'm like, there has to be some kind of twist. This can't be as straightforward as it is. So I was feeling that way too as I was watching it.
And they're banking on the fact that he doesn't remember his parents.
And the fact that, and I thought something was cut because when he was talking, he was only talking about his mother in the dialogue. He never mentioned his father. So I was like, and then I read in the trivia, they reshot the ending, so that made a lot of sense.
But go ahead, Anthony, you got more.
So now Unisol's there, right? And the dad, the quote unquote dad, is shooting him with a shotgun or whatever, and they're basically trying to like get him. Either I forgot if they're trying to kill him or they're trying to bring him back into the program. But just when you think Unisol's gonna win, the real police show up. And they expose the Universal Soldier program, and Veronica's like camera guy shows up and is like, "Hey, give this story." So she's like crying because Jean-Claude Van Damme was just shot, and she's like, "I'm reporting at the scene of a big conspiracy that's going on." And then there's like a whole epilogue about how she lives her life out with Jean-Claude Van Damme, who didn't want to do anything with the program to prolong his life because he figured that, when you die, you die. And that she spent the last days and he was reunited with his real parents. It was insane to watch.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Actually, all of that sounds cool, though. If I'm being honest. Although, to be fair, the entire concept of the movie sounds cool, and it wasn't executed well. So I don't know why I would take that as a reason to believe that this would have been cool. But the way the movie ends, all of that sounds way cooler. I don't know. They should have definitely kept that, I feel like.
So just on a core level, what do you think of the concept of the Universal Soldier? So they're grabbing veterans
Robocop?
from... Yeah, and hiding them from the family. At least Robocop, they put him in a full suit.
Metal.
These guys just have, kind of out there. And just like two things. One, what do you think of the program? And then also they start the movie with that Hoover Dam scene, which is, I guess, supposed to be the display of the Universal Soldier program in action. And I was like so perplexed by it because one major point was them rappelling down the dam, which looked cool. But the whole point of it was just banking on the fact that these two soldiers wouldn't turn around. Like the entire mission.
And that they had a recording of those soldiers saying, Area 1, clear.
Area 2. Well, it also didn't make sense to me that this was like 25 years later after the opening
and they have
scene.
An age.
And they said something about this being the third mission that they were on, or the third whatever. So I don't know what was happening within those 25 years. I guess the aging
Clearly
thing,
they weren't
Carlos,
testing.
maybe it was like it's probably the regeneration. Maybe that's like how you justify that. But yeah, just a strange, I guess because we're just so used to these tropes and seeing them presented in a different way. It would be in a big laboratory in some underground like bunker, right? Not in the back of a truck that transforms, that almost transforms.
And also too, like come on, like that it was the largest janitor anyone has ever seen. My disguise is I'm a janitor. Bulging muscles, you can clearly see I've got the I got the potato ears, and I've got like the soldier stance, and you're telling me to stop. I must be the only person in, this whole place that hasn't heard gunfire. I'm just, excuse me, I got to mop the floor over here. And it just didn't occur to them. It just looked so silly to me when he walked in like, oh, I'm just a janitor.
With just a toolbox. But like, what was the plan? So they're like, all right, these guys do all this stuff, and you just walk straight forward. And, like, I know everyone's sneaking around, but you just keep going straight. They're going to shoot you a bunch. And then...
You act like you died, and then inside, he also it looked like they had the Desperado, the gun. I mean, the tool, right? I couldn't tell if what he had in his hand was a toolkit that had a gun in it, or if it had a camera. Apparently, it had a camera.
Yeah, which was like, I guess, like it's a huge portion of what this company does. Like everyone had the head cams, and then there's a cam in the toolbox, and there's like 3 people that it needs to go into the truck, and it was like technical and complex for no reason because they weren't like.
It seems impractical too. Like, why would I destroy my depth perception so that I could have just like this Borg eyepiece, right? So that you can see what's going on, but I also kind of need to see like what happens. It was the that joke from the Avengers where it was like. Where it was Nick Cage couldn't fly the helicarrier because the button was on the other, like right he had the eye patch. Like what happens if an enemy's coming from this side? Like you're gonna rely on the guys in the back watching the camera feed to be like 3:00. It just doesn't.
Something I hope is explored in at least one of these other 6 Universal Soldier movies. I think like the choice of that, and this goes back to Telly's point of just like not having like a vision. They want them to be robots, right? Like, can we all acknowledge that they wanted them to be robots, and then they just added so many layers to be like, nah, they're not robots. Like,
they're zombies.
Yeah. Like, first off, why the fuck would they be like? Why would they not? So, first off, when they don't have the memories, I guess they're like stoic and serious, and they have no emotion. But Jean-Claude Van Damme never like gets his back. But Dolph Lundgren is his is super. Back, I guess. Like I was just having a hard time of trying to understand.
Well, they said something about like towards the end when they go to Jerry Orbach that like it's your final memory, and you're like working off of that, which the last thing you remembered, and then because Van Damme woke up in the middle, I guess, of the Unisol program, and he wanted to go home.
Yeah.
It's just a funny thing to think about. And I guess that's why like Dolph Lundgren was so aggressive. As opposed to Van Damme, who was much more like a pussycat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's... Okay.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, also, it just... Back to the... I mean, it sounds silly for me to talk about, like, unrealistic or impractical, but, I mean, one thing that just struck me throughout the whole movie is, you go through an event, and clearly these guys are malfunctioning somehow. They're not acting completely right. Dolph Lundgren is now blown away some guys, just some random, interviewer guy, right in the face. And now we have to clean up this mess. How are we going to clean up this mess? Let's send the same soldiers that caused this mess in to solve the mess. And what does solving look like? We're just going to go to this hotel and blow the fucking place to bits. Okay, that didn't work. We're going to go to this other place and blow this place to bits. Like, these guys were on a rampage all across the fucking Midwest, right? Just wherever they go, just shoot the place up. And, again, there's no, I understand this is like a rogue op or something, right? Their own kind of thing. But at a certain point, within 2 minutes of the reporter getting killed, they had a news report about how it was the reporter chick who did it, right? Like, so they got connections. But the answer is just rampage across the country, and also like getting away from them. I'm in this beat down truck in the middle of the desert. There's only one road. How am I like? What is the escape plan here?
Yeah,
right? Like, it just none of it came together, and the whole time I'm just like. At a certain point, maybe don't send the homicidal maniac to clean up the after effects of his homicidal maniac, killing spree. I don't know.
No, the thing that I didn't understand was, are they all malfunctioning, or was it only them two? Because it was like, okay, yes, Jean-Claude Van Damme is starting to malfunction, but it seemed like Dolph Lundgren, like he wasn't even that subtle about it, like just
He's looking at
nonstop.
them.
He would just like be like,
He's sort of looking, yeah.
Yeah.
what's going on?
There's a cut.
And,
There's a close up. He's listening. He's like,
yeah.
They're
So,
talking about stuff.
and he clearly remembered the whole program. So just like on every level, this program, from what you were talking about too, wasn't even the renegade part. Like I could see if they were like super tactful at the beginning, and then when Dolph Lundgren takes over, that's when they're like, okay, let's start shooting everything. That was the official, like, army policy to just be like, yo, let's just blow up this entire motel. But it's just wild because it's like, first off, I know usually we talk about what the critics think, but the overall consensus from the critics is this movie is a Terminator 2 clone, and there's a ton of parallels. We're talking about, like, I know he does it in other movies, but Jean-Claude Van Damme's Naked Mad Times, cutting out the tracker is the same as like ripping off the arm. The lack of emotions of the machines, the slamming of the wall, into the walls, like how they fight. The movie didn't even like try to establish an identity, and then like the one like real, not one, but one of the main credible parts of Terminator is at least like its foundation and seriousness and like plausibility of it, and just this movie had none of it, because it just didn't make sense or work.
When you get shot, just take an ice plunge, you'll be fine.
One thing before we move on to that, just one thing that bugged me was like the ending of this movie with the rain and the fire fighting outside reminded me of the ending of Cyborg. And that was a movie with like a fraction of the budget here, and that had more style.
And like the ending of Time Cop,
because you remember the ending of Cyborg when they're coming after him. He's doing the split in between the walls, and there's like some beautiful shots there. And this one this was lacking that flourish. But I think this movie, as I was watching it, first thing that came to mind was like, this is like a version of Robocop if you cut out the first act of Robocop and you just start with him just becoming, resurrected, right? Yeah. And then you don't know what the hell's going on. And then from a Terminator 2 standpoint, yeah, you got the road film, and then you got like the guy chasing him. But I felt that one of the weakest points of the movie is that there's no chemistry between Ali Walker and Jean-Claude Van Damme. And I thought this could have been a more interesting movie if the Ali Walker character, if they were going for Terminator 2 vibes, just make it like a 14-year-old boy, or make it another dude and have this be sort of like a buddy film. And there was a movie that actually Mark Dacascos did called Drive with Kadeem Hardison. And it was a similar plot. And Mark Dacascos is like a supercharged human who goes rogue, and then he ends up with Kadeem Hardison, and they hit the road together. They're riffing off of each other. And, Mark
that sounds like a much better movie than this.
Yeah, it just could have been a lot more fun, and you could have still had sort of if you wanted to be more serious, maybe have like do what they did in Terminator 2 with like a little kid kind of like speaking, trying to help, Jean-Claude Van Damme rediscover his humanity. Or if you just want to be silly, it could have just been a buddy film.
Yeah. Also, I think in terms of movies that this kind of pulls from, I know this might be a hot take. I think that first scene in the beginning was taking inspiration from Platoon.
Okay.
Right, and I think around that time too, there was there was like a slew of Vietnam kind of movies covering, kind of, I don't know if it's PTSD, if it's happening while you're there, but what I will say is, I think one of the few effective parts of this movie, I actually didn't mind that intro in Vietnam as the setup. For what it was. Again, I'm not comparing this to Platoon, right? This isn't Oliver Stone, right? This is Roland Emmerich.
Yeah, but fucking head come apart, man. Yeah. Oh, that's it.
So, and as a setup for like why this guy's crazy, and as a flashback or something, as a reason for the Unisols to find flashbacks, and for Dolph Lundgren to keep on, for him to keep going back to. I actually thought that scene was effective. And again, the idea that I feel like they just watched Platoon when they did that scene is interesting. I'm clearly not as effective, but if I had to pick something, I thought that was all right.
I
Yeah,
was just annoyed that they were showing flashbacks of something we just saw like 5 minutes ago.
I don't like
in the
when they do
movie.
that.
It's like I
they
hate when
only
they
shot
do that.
the one, the
They
one
did that
moment.
like 10 minutes in. They keep flashing back. I'm like, yeah, we know what's
saw it.
going
We
on.
saw it.
Yeah. This goes back 5 minutes ago. Yeah, I think for me the open I thought was like a little bit of a mix because one, I think like with the context of war and what they were trying to do, like they were trying to make it like really serious, and then it got a very actiony, right? Like it got to run, and one person's going, and then also the whole he's deranged and like caught in the war. Then his character became like something else, and they attached that to that war moment. So it seemed like there was just a disconnect for me with that. But because also one thing that I thought was really cool was the open when they announce who the actors are, and they did like you see Jean-Claude Van Damme, he's dead, and it zips up and it's like Jean-Claude Van Damme, and then it's Dolph Lundgren. Cool. And I thought those were the things of like, you just had this really like it wasn't like, the way it was presented wasn't emotional, but I just think the context was heavy, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it went into like, it's summer blockbuster time, and it was so one moment to the next into another thing. But to go to your point with the borrowing from Platoon, the supermarket scene borrowing from Rambo, like with the monologue.
He actually
ahead, Carlos,
says, "You don't just turn it off. You don't just turn it off." Right? Like,
and it was just, it felt like just so much of a mashup, but not like I watched Longlegs recently, and that was a mashup of like one genre, right? Like it was like Seven, Silence of the Lambs, and Kurosawa's The Cure, which were like very similar movies and just like parts taken from each one. Not Akira Kurosawa, different
no
Kurosawa.
Yeah, the
this one was just like, all right, we're gonna take something from Terminator. We're gonna take something from like a real PTSD movie. We're gonna take this. There's gonna be like funny parts. I mean, even down to like a guy hits the jukebox and then it plays the song and hits the pool tables and the balls start going into the pockets. It was just it's just tough to like one part with it jumping to another part. But did you guys have any favorite scenes with this movie?
The diner scene.
Okay, with
Van Damme invents mukbang in that scene, so I thought that was cool. I mean, it's lighthearted. I thought like you see a different side of Van Damme. It's goofy. Fighting is not impressive, but just overall, in terms of entertainment value, that's unfortunately from this action movie. It's him watching him eat a lot of food.
Yeah. How about you, Carlos?
So, this is one of those situations where I like it because it's bad. Clearly, the supermarket scene, right?
Yeah.
Again, because flashbacks to Rambo. B, because at that point in the movie, I just feel like things had gotten so ridiculous, and I had already resigned myself to kind of the flow of this movie and the way it was going to go, that I feel like this was just a perfect kind of cap to the ridiculousness. And then lastly, God bless you, Dolph Lundgren. So first of all, let me just say I'm a huge fan of Dolph Lundgren. I mean, if you look into who he is as a person, it's fascinating. He's like a Rhodes Scholar. He's an Olympic gold medalist, right? He's like a third Dan in Shotokan. He's actually fought in competitive martial arts. And again, just the idea that he's a Rhodes Scholar. I think he's a chemical engineer or something, right? So it's just like this guy is like an amazing example of humanhood. Acting, maybe not the highest thing on him, but I think he does have a natural charisma. And God bless him, he was acting his ass off, at least as best he could. I felt like in that scene, he felt like, this is my chance to shine. This is my chance to show that I can do dramatic work, that I can do the PTS thing. Clearly he watched Rambo and he didn't leave anything out on the field in that scene. So, but it's also terrible. The scene is terrible. Like every part about it none of it makes any sense. Almost laughably so. And it was at least an example. I feel like throughout a lot of this movie, I felt like the actors seemed bored. I feel like the set designers and the artists seemed bored. This just seemed like people going along with the motions. And this was the one scene in the entire movie where I felt like somebody was going all out. Whether it was effective or not is another story. But God bless you, Dolph Lundgren, for trying.
Probably didn't hurt that he like kicked those 3 guys in the face like right before that. I thought that was like a really cool moment. What'd you think about Dolph Lundgren, Telly?
So like Carlos, I'm a big fan of Dolph Lundgren. Even his most of his movies have been straight to video. I respect the guy. I think he's got a great screen presence, even if he's not the greatest actor in the world. But I thought he was like passable in this movie. He just probably wasn't very well directed. And now that I'm just thinking about the movie, I'm like, what's his motivation? He just wants to kill Van Damme, right? Is that okay? I mean, it just felt kind of weak. But I thought he was okay. It was just I thought also just Van Damme being the hero, he just had very little agency. He was just like running from Dolph Lundgren the whole time, and that doesn't make for a very interesting hero.
Yeah.
Also, I want to throw it out there too as a side note. We were talking about this earlier, but Dolph Lundgren, I'll make it quick. My favorite stories ever was on the set of Rocky IV, a great Rocky movie. I guess him and Stallone were kind of going through some of the choreography for the fighting, and Stallone was at the height of his success, must have been feeling himself a little bit. Heard a little bit about how Dolph Lundgren was like the real deal, an actual, tournament fighter, and challenged Dolph Lundgren to punch him in the chest as hard as he could. And Lundgren was like, I'm not going to do it. And I think part of the, there was that scene in the movie where they're measuring his punching power. So I don't want to do this. Stallone said, listen, with everybody watching, I'm not going to sue or whatever. Just do it. So he punches him and sends him to the hospital with a heart palpitation. They had to pause filming Rocky IV for like 3 weeks while Stallone recuperated in the hospital. Fucking badass.
Congratulations.
I'm sorry to interrupt that,
you
but
played yourself. Sylvester Stallone.
Oh yeah.
What was the point of that? Yeah, and on the other side, we got Jean-Claude Van Damme. I know we talked about him a bit in the Time Cop episode, but and also we have our my famous battle between 80s Jean-Claude Van Damme and 90s Jean-Claude Van Damme. And I was telling Carlos and Telly that I am in the 90s camp. And one of the things that I really I was thinking about it, and I'll tell you why. I think by the time that I got put onto Jean-Claude Van Damme, this was probably one of my first Jean-Claude Van Damme movies. And I felt like when I went back, I wasn't super impressed with the choreography as a 10-year-old with Jean-Claude Van Damme movies in comparison to like Three Ninjas. Mind you, I am still a child at this point. So, you've seen kids like they're doing flips. There's a little bit more karate, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and stuff like that. There was a lot more
fellow chucker, eh?
Yeah, there was a lot more like kung fu and fighting choreography where it wasn't just, I think like the older ones were very in the vein of like Rocky, right? Like it wouldn't be like, it was just like one shot, that kind of stuff. So I think like young me wasn't as impressed as I was when he would like have guns and kick people's ass in like a kind of realistic setting. But yeah, I just want to update
like
you
Universal Soldier.
Yeah. Well, in hindsight, listen, this is 8-year-old me.
In hindsight, as I was watching Van Damme's performance in this movie, where he's kind of like he seems kind of sedated and stuff, it's sort of like what he ended up becoming, like in his like later movies, like post like Stardom, where he's kind of like sleepwalking through his roles a bit, and that was just a kind of a funny thing to see. But I thought his performance was like interesting. You saw a different side of him. The action, I think, is let down by the director because there's nothing special or memorable about any of the action scenes in this movie. Unfortunately,
can I just say that one of
the things like martial artists who are like action stars and like again why didn't you have them? And even the final fight at the end is just like not interesting. The way it's shot,
and if you think about it,
doing.
This is already the era where like Jackie Chan is starting to cross over. I think Rumble in the Bronx either had come out by this point or was about to come out. So it's not like American audiences hadn't seen, kind of Asian, choreography in fight movies in films. So there's really no reason for the choreography in this to be this bad. Although I will say there is another drop kick that happens in the film, which, again,
Well,
gotta
signature
love.
moves for sure.
Yeah.
But one thing that I'm noticing as we're going through a lot of these 80s movies that I didn't realize when I was a kid was that there seems to be this trope in a lot of final action sequences where the hero's losing, and then all of a sudden he just gets motivated. Someone gets
Like a
killed. He
second
has a
wind.
memory.
Yeah.
He gets a second wind, and the second wind is just he's not changing tactics. He doesn't do anything differently. He takes the serum and just starts punching Dolph Lundgren in the face a bunch of times.
like,
Why
"Let me
didn't I
try
think about
this."
that before?
And you don't see like the effects of it either. At least like show it in some way. I guess
Like
that's
his
a
heart pumping or
directing.
something.
Yeah, something,
Yeah.
but it's a camera move or whatever. But Carlos,
it's like this-
to your point, I felt the diner scene was almost a Jackie Chan kind of inspired scene because it's like funny and he's like trying to do something simple while all these people are
I don't want no trouble.
in his way.
He just wants to eat. I don't want no trouble.
I felt like, but there was like, I wish they would have leaned into it and just like used more in the environment. There could have been there could have been a memorable scene there.
Yeah. So playing with like set pieces around there. Again, he had the 8-ball. I really thought for a second he was going to pull is it Hard to Kill with the cigar with the 8 balls in like a sack and just start like hitting. They could have gotten much more creative. Again, you got Van Damme who has that agility and the acrobatics.
Prime,
you got he's in his prime, right? You got Dolph Lundgren, who's a powerhouse. Who again, not only can you buy him being like an imposing menace, but also he's got good form. I've seen him do other things where he looks like he knows how to fight. There's just so many possibilities that they could have taken advantage of, but no one even bothered to try, and it's a real shame.
Well, I think the issue that I'm finding with some of these older movies is the lack of competent stuntmen especially like fighting stuntmen, and I think that's a thing that now with like Atkins and like John Wick especially, like people are really adopting that like Hong Kong style of like a full team of people, and they're like in all the movies, and you don't know who they're like the henchmen or whatever, but and one guy like really does all the carrying. This is kind of the same thing happened with Chuck Norris in the fight in the pool hall, where it becomes like, hey, here's a black belt with a whole bunch of people that have no idea what they're doing, and this was another movie where it's like, hey, it's Jean-Claude Van Damme in a bar with a bunch of people that don't know what they're doing. Here's Dolph Lundgren in a supermarket with a bunch of old people, and I think something that happens with these movies, especially the ones that take place in like the Midwest, where they're supposed to have this like really all-American feel, is that that's the problem, right? Like, there aren't black belts there aren't people that can fight, and it might even look silly if some guy in the diner is like doing all this stuff. So
ninja stars.
yeah, but at the end of the day, it just becomes one guy who we know kicking everybody's ass, and sometimes that's cool, but it also can be kind of one note, especially when the other.
That's where a competent, director or choreographer comes in and tries to make something out of that. Like not all of them have to. Even just the use. I thought that Van Damme and Lundgren being like Vietnam vets that know like amazing like black belt martial arts
CQC
was
stuff,
a bit distracting. But there wasn't a lack of stuntmen, because I noticed Van Damme stuntmen during the scenes when he's like crashing through the walls and stuff. But I think this goes back to the director, because Roland Emmerich, as we know, he thinks that what's exciting is just watching shit blow up, as opposed to he's never been an action guy in terms of choreography or fights or shootouts or anything like that. So I think again, if maybe a better director could have just made this a much more interesting movie.
What do you think? Where do you think this movie goes? Even with the style, let's say this is really like your bag and his style. Where do you think this sits on Emmerich's Mount Rushmore? You got the Godzilla's Independence Days. I know it's slim pickings, but where do you?
I'm not a fan.
Do you think this is one of his best?
I wasn't even a fan of Independence. I didn't like Independence Day at all. So
didn't we see this? Didn't we see Independence Day together?
I think we might have seen it together.
I think we got Chinese afterwards.
I just don't like like the crowd movies that are like just like pure crowd pleasers that are trying to make the audience cheer and laugh, as opposed to really challenging the audience in some way. And I with Roland Emmerich, and I only seen like maybe 3 or 4 Roland Emmerich movies, so I can't say which is my favorite stepchild.
I would say this is not as good as Independence Day, but better than Godzilla.
I'll agree. And overall, just the vision. I know you touched on it before, Telly. It seemed like it wanted to do something that it didn't, right? Like it was like 1969 Vietnam. You know when they do those military movies and then they have the lower thirds and they're like, like Nevada, oh 600, and like they were doing that kind of stuff. They had the Universal Soldier vision. You know, they had the way that they painted up that. Yeah, the way that they painted that truck, it kind of reminded me again another Jean-Claude Van Damme Time Cop, where like the set design just didn't match the. It
reminded me of the villain
ambition.
from Knight Rider, actually, but yeah.
So yeah, this movie, I think we can all agree on that it wasn't executed in the way that probably was in their minds of this, like, you know, super unit that's supposed to be the future of the military. But I thought it was really interesting that Andrew Davis, who is the director of Above the Law, Under Siege, and The Fugitive, was originally supposed to direct this. Now when Emmerich got involved, they rewrote the script and it wasn't the same. But what do you think someone like that would have done with I feel like at least the action scenes would have been a lot more compelling, especially if you look at something like The Fugitive with this, because there is a degree of cat and mouse in this movie, but just didn't feel like the stakes were high enough to carry it. Do you think that, you know, script the same and with different execution, that this movie could have been better?
Yeah, certainly different execution, and I think just better production design or any visible production design would have just increased would just made the movie look better. Because like I hate the look of the Universal Soldiers. It just looks like bulky, and it just looks like they bought a camouflage suit off the rack from a surplus store. There's nothing unique looking about them. You know, the big headset, the eyepiece. And then, just like the laboratory is this like kind of like bulky, shaky kind of like semi truck. There should have been like some high tech laboratory. The look of the Unisols could have been better. Just the overall movie, just kind of a bland looking movie.
I mean,
and
but
what you guys feel about the biggest sin not using Debo more?
Yeah, I was like, is that Debo? And I was like, yeah, that is Debo. Yeah, but even like stuff like that, those scenes with it just looked like someone like built that set in their garage with the hypodermic needles like coming out of the back, and it just looked very sloppy. And in a sci-fi movie, you have to have great production design. And the scene though with all the naked dudes in the smoke in that room, it also looked kind of weird, but.
You know, it's crazy. I got I don't know if this is specific to the version I got, but I got the Blu-ray in Korea, and when you take out the disc, underneath is a clear, a clear case, and the background art is like a wide shot of all the bodies in the thing, just chests. It looks straight up like an adult DVD.
Yeah,
like because it's just flesh. Like
because I was as that scene was up, I was actually walking right now, and it's like, what are you watching?
Yeah, exactly. And first off, like the ass shots that were so out of control. Like it wasn't even like, I'm gonna say the Terminator, like tastefully done, got the super wide of his. They had like the pan down. It wasn't even like a pan down. It seemed like it was like on a mini dolly.
It looked also just like plasticky and rubbery. Like there was like body paint,
really
and then it was like glossy. I mean, because there was so much time spent on it.
Zoom
in. It looked too perfect.
Enhance.
I've never seen a man's behind look so like smooth and clean. And I'll stop there.
Jean-Claude Van Damme said he was really proud on the bonus feature. He was like, they said I could crack a walnut in between if I squeeze really hard. And then I like how he like explained like what he meant, what they meant by putting it in there. But Universal Soldier was not the movie that I thought it was going to be because I bought it in March when I went away, and it's just been sitting on my shelf, and thought this was the perfect opportunity to watch it. And it wasn't a movie that held up. And looking at the Rotten Tomatoes, it's at a 34. The audience score is at a 47%, so I'm not, completely wrong. I was surprised that the IMDb was as high as it was. It was at a 6.1 out of 10, and a Letterboxd, which is usually kind of harsh to some of these, 3 out of 5. So that was much higher than I thought it was going to be. Going to the critics, we got Jonathan Rosenbaum of the Chicago Reader. He said both Van Damme and Lundgren are about as interesting as soup cans. So the main appeal of the picture is waiting for these soup cans to puncture or flatten each other in ever more horrific ways. I think that was a
Nice.
2 out of 4. And
But we
let's
don't
go to
even
the
get there though. That the movie doesn't even do that. You know.
no. Yeah, it definitely left a lot, and it just had that big build up to these, like, these people that you thought would be, because I get, like, you keep them apart and you think that there's going to be a little bit more, but I thought even like a lot of the stuff that they, when they were together, like just not as interesting, or something would happen that would take away from it for me. So for example, like the part with the truck where they're over by the cliff could have been something like much more interesting, but then I was
Yes.
like, I just saw that in Terminator. When he was in front, like shoots the driver, which is like really similar to Arnold Schwarzenegger going in the back and shooting the T-1000 in the truck.
How did he find Van Damme's house, by the way?
Well, I don't know. There's a home. He had an air tag on Van Damme's ass. But even the ending, like if you're gonna rip off Terminator, just rip off Terminator. Lundgren shows up at the end, no scars on him, nothing. He's completely healed. Like have a disgusting looking battle damaged kind of Lundgren at the end fighting Van Damme. You're right.
Mm-hmm.
Do
After he just fell
something
off the
different.
cliff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's like follow the formula. If you're gonna rip it off, rip it off.
And also the great sin also is, at the end, spoiler alert, the Lundgren gets killed by being kicked into a wood chipper, and how there wasn't some kind of pun about having a chip on his shoulder or something to that effect did not get used was a crime, and I'm very disappointed.
I'm gonna agree. So let's find out what the streets are saying, and by doing that, I really just mean Letterbox. With a 5 out of 5 by Ancient Cat Bus says, JCVD and Dolph Lundgren as American grunts in Vietnam blowing the living hell out of each other in the opening scene. Let's fucking go. This baby is getting 5 stars regardless of whatever else happens from here on out. And it more than lived up to the intro.
Wow.
Pure 90s action, no brain, all
Cap.
explosions, one-liners out the ass, some great character work in the margins, the ending that isn't the ending, just an archetypal example of everything good about that era and this genre. Dolph was having so much fun and really communicating it to the audience, and Ali Walker was phenomenal. The best brassy lady sidekick I can remember seeing. 5 out of 5.
This is definitely trolling.
That's Roland Emmerich.
Definitely trolling.
Username, it's definitely not the director. And then we have
Ali Walker wrote that review, but
the name is an anagram for Ali Walker.
I'll put me last just to throw everyone off. And then we have another review from JM97. What if every iconic 80s movie was combined into a bad 90s movie? 1 out of 10.
Nice. I like that.
So I think we're all in agreement except for Ancient Cat Bus that this movie wasn't living up to our expectations. But let's get the official down to the numbers ratings from the Shoot Punch Kick team. Telly, what did you think about Universal Soldier?
I give this 1 delicious plate of mashed potatoes out of 5.
I'm going to give this movie 2.5 earring necklaces out of 5.
Ooh, all right, 2.5. I'm a little bit below you, but I am glad because I was gonna go the necklace, the ear necklace route. But I'm gonna give this 2 anti-war supermarket monologues out of 5. This was my pick, definitely based on. I know exactly why I loved this movie as a kid, and the things that got me, in the door, it being close to Terminator, was probably the thing that I hated the most about it now as a grown man. So that's Universal Soldier. Thanks for watching it. Thanks for watching this podcast. Thanks for hanging with your boys and talking about it. And next week we will have Carlos give us the pick. So Carlos, the floor is yours.
So for a second there, a little bit earlier in the podcast, I felt like you guys were reading in my mind, deeping into my soul.
Uh-oh.
For the next pick, we are going back to the Kurt Russell well and celebrating the 30th anniversary of the release of Stargate.
Oh, I've never seen
back-to-back
Stargate.
Roland Emmerich movies. Okay.
and same
Yeah.
writer too. So we
So
have.
I
right.
actually had another pick plan that I was like really excited for, and then on my feed, it was like literally last week was the release for the 30th anniversary. So
Are they doing anything like any special discs or?
I looked and I didn't see anything particular. And so I got to pick it. This is the first movie I think that I went to go see by myself.
Whoa.
So keep an eye out. Look forward to that next week, guys. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. We are getting some people in the comments. We really
see you.
appreciate it. Give us some recommendations. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Telly. Thank you, Dash. This is Shoot, Punch, Kick. We're out.